So let's talk about the concept of indexing into a list. So one of the most important things you want to do with a list is you want to read an element that's inside of a list. And let's look at our grades again. And indexing into a list, we use the square bracket operator. And we think about the square bracket operator, and that's going to allow us to go inside of the brackets and return a value. So if I put a 2 in here, what value am I going to get for index 2? I have a 97, 98, 97, 97s, 97s, 98s. Okay, let's take a quick look though, because some of you just got tricked. Computer science, we actually don't start counting at 1. We start counting at 0. And so these are the associated indexes or indices for this particular list. It actually goes back to the way they're stored in memory, and that's more of a CSE 30 topic. So I'm not going to go into why we start at 0, but computer scientists start counting at 0. It's just what we do. And so when we're dealing with lists, we start at index 0 being the first element. Index 1 is the 97. So index 2. So when we do grades, bracket 2, we're actually going to get the 98. So grades bracket 2 is going to give us 98, not 97. So we actually start at 0, which makes things a little confusing because when you put that 2 in there as an index, you might think it's the second element of the list, but then we get 38 or 98, which is the third element. So instead of saying first element or second element, we say the element at index 2 or the element at location 2. And so then we have this thing called an index. And just to kind of generalize it a little bit, we take some index. And we're looking up the element in the list at that particular index, starting at counting at 0. So you're counting, but you're going to, start at 0 and not 1. And so grades bracket 2, we're looking at the element in the list at location 2 or index 2. And so just so we don't really get confused by, saying second element, we're not saying second element, we're saying second index, which again means that one there. And so we try not to say first element, second element, etc. And just to show you, grade 0 is 100, which is up here. Grades 1, grades 2, you can see the 100 and the 97, the 98. Grades 3 should give us the 96. Grades 4 should give us another 100. So what's going to happen when I put in grades 5? We try and get the element at index 5, what's going to happen? Well, I don't have a 5. Where's this 5 thing we're talking about? There's no 5 over here. So there's nothing there. I don't know what would be here, right? I don't have anything. And so what's going to happen when you go beyond in the list, as 2 people actually said in chat, is you're going to get an error called an index error, list index out of range. Sometimes I'll forget to say range and I'll actually say index out of bounds. But basically, we've gone beyond the end of the list. So we grab the first 5 items, which we know that's 5 items. And so the 6th item, there's nothing there. And so we get this out of range error, which is actually kind of nice that Python tells us that we have this problem and tells us where this problem occurred. Some languages like C and C++, they don't tell you have an error. They just actually read whatever's there. Whatever happens to be stored in memory there, it just grabs it and just uses it. And it could be complete garbage, and it usually is, or some kind of random value. And you just start using those values, and it just literally breaks your program. You don't even know why. So it can lead to significant problems. But Python, thankfully, actually tells us when we go beyond the end of our list. And it's going to continue doing that. So I did 5, and 6 did the same thing. 8's going to do the same thing. It's going to happen to all of them. So if we do length of grades, remember grades has 5 numbers in it, right? The last element we can access, what is it? The last element we can access is not 5. The last element we can access is 1 less than 5. So the very last element is 4, which is the length minus 1. So we can access up to 1 less than the length of the list. And if we try to access at the length of the list, then we get an error. So we can't go beyond the length minus 1 on the list. Now, this index can be any expression as long as it's an integer. So grades 2 plus 1. If we do 2 plus 1, we get 96. Well, what's 2 plus 1? 2 plus 1 is 3. What's index 3? 0, 1, 2, 3, 96. So that's where we get that. In addition to using numbers, we can actually use variables as long as those variables hold integers. So IDX2 is index 2. We pass IDX in there. And this is an abbreviation for index. And that gives us the value 98, which is what we expect out of index 2, 0, 1, 2. Okay, so let's look at grades, length, grades minus 1. What's that going to give us? It's going to give us the last element, right? No matter what list we have, it's going to give us the last element. Now, of course, we have 100 in there, and we have 200s. So we're not 100% certain, but I know it's going to give us the last one because that's going to be index 4. So it's always going to give us the largest index in the list when we use length minus 1. And if we try to use the length, we're going to get an error because that's going to be 5 and we start at 0, and so we can't get it. So we have to subtract 1. So the largest index is length minus 1. The smallest index is 0. So what happens if I put something like grades minus 1? What am I going to get if I do grades minus 1? Like, do I have a minus 1 index in here? What, are we going to access something here? Am I going to have a problem? Someone said 100. That's interesting. Another 100. Well, it seems like I'm going to get an index out of range error. We get 100, but which 100 is it? Is it the first 100? Remember, we have 200s in here. The first, someone says the last 100. Well, let's actually go, let's try minus 2. Well, that's 96. So minus 3 should give us 98. Minus 4 gives us 97. Minus 5 gives us 100 again. So we actually went all the way backwards, right? So notice the pattern. So if we give a negative number, it's going to wrap around and goes back, starts at the end of the list and then goes back to the front, and it keeps going towards the beginning. But if we try to go to grades minus 6, well, now we're out of range again. So it only wraps around one time. It doesn't, we can't do it twice. So the value used for indices to access the element list can go from 0, and let's just actually write that down. This index must be an integer, which can go from 0 to length minus 1. Or when you go negative, you can go in minus 5, oops, minus 5. It can go minus 1 all the way back to the beginning, which is basically negative length. If you think about what the length is, it's 5, so minus 5. So it wraps around one time and can go out of range. So it actually gives us, I don't know of any other language that allows us to do that. That's actually a unique thing to Python, this whole thing of negative index. But it's a nice way, instead of having to do, oh, I want the last element length minus 1. No, just do minus 1. In fact, let me flip this around. because the -1 is really the same there. And then we go to negative length, which is the 0 element, all the way to length -1. And remember, length is the method length, the function length, and then some list.